What's your electorate, Andrew?
Bowman.
Well, ladies and gentlemen,
This here? Let's cover this.
welcome to LibertyWorks' inaugural Politics in the Pub event. My name is Andrew Cooper. I'm the president of LibertyWorks, and what a pleasure it is to have our speakers here tonight. But before the introductions, I'll just run through some housekeeping. The bathrooms are out here. More importantly, the bar is out there. Now, each of our speakers has volunteered their valuable time to be with us tonight. It is Politics in the Pub, so you're welcome to voice your approval by clapping or even a little bit of cheering, perhaps, and perhaps mild disapproving.
Are they free to interrupt and jeer? Come on, are we free?
They are, speakers aren't.
Yes.
A little bit of groaning if you don't approve of any of our speakers' comments. We do insist, though, that you remain respectful of our guests and the time that they've donated to us. Mobile phones are off. If you've got an urgent call, take it out on the veranda. Our format is this. Each speaker will spend 2 minutes introducing themselves, what they're about, and why you should support them. That will be followed by a panel discussion, probably about 20 minutes, and then questions from you, our attendees. So make sure you're ready with your questions. These sort of things work best when our speakers are put under the pump with bombs from the floor. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first guest. Malcolm Roberts was elected to the Australian Senate. Was elected to the Australian Senate this year as part of Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party's re-emergence as a political force. He is a graduate of the University of Queensland with a degree in mining engineering, and he also has an MBA from the University of Chicago. He spent much of his early career in mining. I believe your father was a miner as well. Firstly on the coalface and later in management, and finally as an engineer with some of the most well-known and successful operations in the country. In 1994 he started Catalyst for Corporate Performance whilst developing an interest in Eastern and alternative self-help techniques, including meditation. He is well known as a climate skeptic and has been vocal and active critic of many of the organisations and commentators that claim consensus on the science of global warming. Recently, he stated that international bankers, the Rothschilds, Goldman Sachs, Rockefellers and others, are surreptitiously trying to gain global control through environmentalism. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Senator Malcolm Roberts.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and I haven't prepared a speech. I'm just going to speak off the cuff. So tell me when the 2 minutes is up. Okay, I don't want to rob people of time. I want to also remind you to share this on Facebook, because this is going live on live stream through Facebook, our Facebook page. The most important thing for me is freedom. And that is something that we all share because it's inherent in all of us. There's one thing else that we share in this room. We are all humans, all of us. And I am very, very proud to be a human. And I'm tired of humans being put down. So what I'm about is about exposing the Greens. That is fundamental, because I thought you'd like that, but we like doing it. Because I want to acknowledge, before I go any further, someone who has defended freedom for many, many years, and that's Viv Forbes. Could you stand up, Viv? I also want to acknowledge Andrew Cooper and the others who have organised this. And I also want to acknowledge everyone for coming here, because freedom is essential for civilization. Freedom is essential for human progress. So I think there are 8 main steps for human progress. The first one, the undoubted one, is freedom, because that's where creativity comes from, the creativity to be able to think freely, share ideas, and then initiate ideas, use our innovation and our initiative. The second one is rule of law. So we don't have a rule of a despot, we have a rule of law. The third one is constitutional governance, so we have some succession. The fourth one is secure property rights. That is essential for freedom. It's essential for progress. The fifth is honest money, honest currency. The sixth is fair, efficient, honest taxation system. The seventh is families, because families are the ultimate welfare providers, they're the ultimate nurturers, they're the ultimate unit within our society. And the eighth is cheap, accessible, reliable energy. And the reason that's so important is because when you have cheap energy, it's very high productivity, which leads to high prosperity, which leads to further progress. All of those figures, all of those factors are under threat in our society right now, starting with freedom. And the reason we go after the Greens is two reasons. First of all, no one else will. And by kowtowing to the Greens, even being silent, we're endorsing them. The second point is that the Greens, by suppressing free speech, are enabling all kinds of ills to slide through. So I'm happy to answer your questions. Who's next?
Thanks, Malcolm. Our second guest. Our second guest is the Liberal Party's federal member for Bowman, encompassing, for the most part, Redland City. Andrew Lemming was first elected to the Queensland Lower House seat of Bowman in 2004, giving up a career as an eye surgeon and public health advisor. In 2007, with the backlash against the Howard government, Andrew was re-elected in a cliffhanger vote count that lasted many weeks. He eventually hung on by the barest of margins, or 64 votes. He has since then built Bowman into a safe Liberal seat, winning the 2016 poll with a margin of 9%. Prior to becoming an MP, he studied medicine at the University of Queensland, holds a diploma in obstetrics and gynecology from the Royal College of Gynecologists, as well as a Master of Public Administration from the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. He has a Master of Public Policy from Charles Darwin University and a Master of Philosophy and Public Health from the University of Sydney. We get it, Andrew, you're pretty smart. Well done.
Is this coming out in like 3 minutes?
He's worked as a GP in Central Queensland in public health, economics. He's an eye surgeon, as well as extensive volunteer work. For example, including 3 months in Afghanistan, clearing landmines with the British charity Halo Trust, and doing basic war surgery with the International Council of the Red Cross in Kabul. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Member for Bowman, Andrew Lemming.
Thanks, Miles. Thanks for having us. Quite tough. Cheers.
Well, first, Coops, we went to school together. We've got to have a full disclosure here, mate, in 1980. I'm just delighted to be with you two gentlemen, Malcolm and David. I really admire the work you do. I'm going to be a fair bit more pragmatic. I'm a lower house member. I'm a member of a large party, a merged Liberal National Party here in Queensland. I will simply say I'm a person who's dedicated my career to making sure if money's taken from individuals, that it's spent and invested as well as possible. I can't prevent tax, but I can make sure it's well spent. I can identify the shonks. I can find inefficiencies. I can expose waste. And that has been my career for 12 years. That comes from working in a hospital where I saw it firsthand. It's what drove me to politics. There's sort of 10 things that I think about. Why I'm in politics, first and foremost, getting money spent in the right places, investing in infrastructure, getting rid of unnecessary taxes like a carbon tax, getting rid of unnecessary politicians like Kevin Rudd and Julie Gillard as expeditiously as possible. I'm committed to giving every person a chance at redistributing labour. I want work for the dole. I want the new path. I want to see full-time and part-time jobs equally respected. Put Yockham's razor through foreign aid unless the money is well spent. Keep a tight rein on state bureaucracies, which tend to grow faster than the federal, which we keep more under control. Keep unions under control, because outside of workplace safety, they play virtually no public good role whatsoever. Free trade agreements, I'm a massive supporter of. Labor's never started and finished one in their 6-year term. We're responsible for every other one of them, including bringing the big ones in, China and Japan. And then lastly, I want to see an employment system that allows people to move in and out of the workforce with flexibility, a school system that's the best in the world, and that's a massive challenge, childcare that has early intervention. Now, some people are uncomfortable with that, but I want to see the best possible starts for children, because that's where money is best spent. Lastly, it's great to be here tonight, and there's nothing like having standing room only, especially Coops, when you don't provide many seats. All right.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Our final speaker, Senator David Leyonhjelm, describes himself as a libertarian or a classical liberal who wants government wound back to a minimal role in society. He is the first Liberal Democrat to be elected to office in Australia, having won his Senate seat for New South Wales back in 2013 and being re-elected this year in the double dissolution election just passed. And indeed, we do thank David for flying up from New South Wales to attend this event. It's very much appreciated. Prior to David being elected to the Senate, he studied vet science and became a practicing vet before getting involved in marketing and management roles in the animal health industry. David has also completed a law degree with an MBA from Macquarie University, and in 1989, David was a founding director of Barron Strategic Services, an agro-business consultancy firm. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Senator David Leyonhjelm.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm going to stay seated out of respect for my age. As Andrew said, I'm a libertarian or classical liberal. What that means, for those who are not quite sure, is sort of a combination of free enterprise plus civil rights. I don't think the government has a role in most of the things where it currently takes a role. David Hume, the Scottish philosopher from the Enlightenment period, said the only role for government is to protect life, liberty and property. And of course, if you think about it, the government has extended well beyond that. And if it returned to life, liberty and property and left us alone, we would in fact be much richer and better off. The things that really piss me off, and I have concentrated on a great deal in the 2.5 years in which I've been a senator, have been the nanny state. I had an inquiry into that. Political correctness really gets up my nose, I'm sure many in this room as well. High taxes. I'm often the only person in the Senate railing against increasing taxes and indeed increasing expenditure. Red tape, that's a major focus of mine at the moment. I actually have a select committee investigating red tape just established, and of course lefties. The general philosophy of libertarianism or classical liberalism is about individuals, not collectives. So we reflect that in my party, the Liberal Democrats, reflects that in our policies. We have absolutely no policies based on gender, race, sexual identification. Our policies are just about people. All people are people, and provided there's equality before the law, it doesn't matter what group they identify with.
Thank you, David. And congratulations, 2 minutes, not bad. Gentlemen, when we're reading your bios or listening to your bios, the one thing that leaps out is that none of you appear to be quintessential party men. You have impressive careers, academic qualifications, and enjoyed successful business or professional careers. Can you explain or share with us what motivated you to get into politics? Malcolm, perhaps you could.
Sure. Probably one of the best parts of my education was as soon as I graduated in mining engineering, I worked as a miner for 3 years, around the country, several different regions, and that was to gain practical experience and people experience, and that's fundamental. It also taught me about listening, and that's fundamental. And what I saw in Parliament when I raised the issue of climate change, or global warming, whatever it's called these days, I could see people not listening, or if they listened, they didn't do anything. So when Pauline Hanson called me, I didn't actually think about politics. Pauline Hanson called me and said, "Hey, I love the way you speak out. You've got a ton of guts. I want you on the Senate floor next to me." So I put her through the hoops for 11.5 hours and interrogated her, and she learned quite a bit. And so I didn't have any natural motive to get into politics, but when I realised how strong Pauline was and I'd heard about her from many friends, I thought, this woman is going to help us enormously, and this woman is going to help the country. She's got no ideology driving her other than serving the people, listening to the people, serving the people, and speaking up. And I thought that is really refreshing and honest, so that's why I jumped in.
David.
I'm a very reluctant politician. I've been involved in politics since I was about 19 or 20. I was a member of Young Labor to oppose... yeah, but do you know the reason? I opposed conscription and I opposed anti-abortion laws. I was a libertarian without knowing what the hell a libertarian was back in my early days. I've always hated authority. So I was a member of the Labor Party for a few years, then I went off to communist countries and as part of my world travels and realised that they weren't exactly paradise. and gradually realised that free market capitalism was the only way to go. I joined the Liberal Party for a few years and realised it wasn't liberal. I joined the Shooters Party. I joined the Shooters Party in New South Wales and realised it wasn't liberal either. It was only interested in shooting, and
Strange, then.
yeah. Well, I mean, the argument I used to make inside the party was, we expect people as shooters to respect our freedom to practice our sport, engage in our sport. We should respect the freedom of other people who want to do something that's not hurting anybody else. I had a hell of a time convincing the other people in the party that that was a legitimate argument. So eventually I left and joined the Liberal Democrats. The Liberal Democrats was, right from the beginning, a libertarian party. It was established in 2001 in Canberra. I didn't join till late 2005, so it was going before I joined, but it's obviously gone leaps and bounds. I ran the party pretty much ever since I joined it, but I didn't agree to become a candidate for the party until, well, the 2013. I ran in 2010 as a candidate, but in a seat where I was no chance of winning. I didn't want to win, I just wanted to run it. Then in 2013, it was really unavoidable. I'd run the party for so long. I had so many people saying, well, you've got to put your hand up, so I did, and bugger me if I didn't get elected.
Thanks, Coops. So I'm probably an accidental politician. I came back from East Timor in the US. I just thought, you know, hopefully Coops will introduce me to his sister, and but you didn't, thanks mate. And so I went for politics instead.
She's here, mate. I've got my eyes on
Oh,
you.
hell. Okay. And so I put my name on just because I had a big ego and accidentally won the election. So it was pretty simple. I had to quit my career and stuff. But yeah, when these gentlemen would say to you why they're not in a major party, for me, I'm more happy to nudge. I'm just happier to be inside the larger system where there is a fair bit of contestability inside the Libs, and we never agree, do we? You see that every day. But I enjoy just nudging things, in particular around the big cash cow departments of health, education and social services. So that's where the money is really. And I'm trying to clean that area up. And I don't think Menzies ever said that we can't be good at those areas as Liberals, but somehow we've decided we're not good at them, and the public has decided we're not good at them. So my goal in my career is to at least improve the Lib standing in that area. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. David, in your opinion, what is the greatest threat to our country, our way of life?
Well, that's a bit of a list, but probably at the top of the list I think would be our fiscal irresponsibility. We have a $40 billion deficit. We have a $300 billion debt. It's costing us about $1.1 billion a month in interest, and it's only that low because interest rates are so low. What we're doing is transferring debt onto the next generation, and we've got this enormous spending problem. As Andrew said, it's health, education and welfare, plus of course welfare includes the elderly and support for the elderly. It's a vast expense. A relatively small proportion of the population are paying most of the taxes. At least half the population is not paying any net tax at all, and you know it is a serious problem. I don't quite know how we're going to fix it without some nasty medicine, and the longer we leave it, the nastier the medicine will be. It has the potential to destroy our way of life. We cannot live on borrowed money for too much longer. It has to be fixed.
Well, David just gave the Liberal answer, mate, so I might as well give what I thought was going to be your answer, and I mean that is servility. I mean our great challenge is keeping people interested in government, worried about how money is spent, concerned about where China will be in 20 or 30 years' time, our relationship with Southeast Asia. These are all massive problems, and ultimately we have a post-resource hangover, a reliance on the easy money, and an education system that is not producing the best. We produce half as many top quintile students, 3 times as many dunces as the 5 best education systems in the world averaged out. That is not sustainable for retaining a standard of living. Thanks.
I'm agreeing with David in that there's no simple one answer. For me, it comes down to Greens, tax and constitution. It really is easy, but not one of them comes up at the top. I often talk about tax as the biggest threat because tax is destroying this country. We all know, every one of us in this room knows that if we tax something, its use decreases. So why the hell do we tax employment through gross income, and why the hell do we tax payroll tax? They're just symptomatic of evils in this country, and the tax system is choking our country, it's destroying our country. And Andrew's party has put in a carbon dioxide tax. After promising to withdraw it, they introduced it on the 1st of July this year. It was passed last year, and we can talk more about that later. The Greens are so dangerous because they're anti-human. They're anti-environment, anti-science, anti-civilization, anti-industrialisation, anti-education, anti-human. That is the Greens. But the biggest thing about the Greens is that they suppress free speech. When I speak up, they don't attack what I'm saying, they attack me. And that causes other people to shrink and not speak up. And when political correctness takes hold in our country, as it has, then all kinds of evils get swept by and they don't even get challenged. And the Constitution is under threat, has been under threat since 1901 because it's continually being subverted. And what's happening is that we are getting a stronger and stronger central government. And the very fundamental principle of our Constitution is competitive federalism, and that has been destroyed. And that is the way we have to restore competitive federalism. That is fundamental to America's nation, and they have destroyed it there too. And I've travelled through all 50 states in America, all states in Australia. I've worked in most of them, worked in 8 American states. And the respect I have for the American founding fathers is enormous. And they saw the need to have sovereign states in competitive federalism, and that has just been smashed.
Malcolm, we're on to tax. When I first met you, you described yourself as a libertarian. And you said you're a fan of Murray Rothbard, who argued in his 1982 book, The Ethics of Liberty, that taxation is theft. Malcolm, is taxation theft?
Yes, it is, when it's used to control. See, government has been subverted in this country and even in the United States. Government is from the people. We give certain people the authority, we give them the authority to govern for us, to look after limited services within our country. We now serve the government in this country. And I'm not talking about the Liberal National Party government, I am talking about Liberal, National, Labor, Greens governments. We are now serving them through the tax system, and it is now amounting to theft. And the tax system is just so out of control because what's happening, you put in one regulation, just one regulation, and you'll find someone trying to get around it, so someone puts in another regulation, then other people getting around that. And next thing you have a patchwork quilt of band-aids on band-aids and a monstrous tax system and a monstrous regulatory system. We've now got duplication of education systems, health systems, so many other systems that should be looked after by the states, and we're growing them enormously in federal government. The other one is education. And they're being hijacked, and this is why the American founding fathers and our founding fathers were so strong about competitive federalism. Once you get a strong central government, they take over, and that is exactly what's happening in education, health, and so many other factors in so many other publics.
Malcolm, we're going to take that as a yes.
Yes. I get wound up about tax.
David, is taxation theft?
Well, theft implies that it's illegal. So it's legalised stealing. Does that make it theft? Well, it depends whether you know it's within the law, so it's not against the law in the traditional definition of the word theft. Is it misappropriation of property? Is it justified misappropriation of property? A large amount of it is. Libertarians are not anarchists. We don't believe in zero government. We think the governments have a role. If I mentioned protection of life, liberty and property as being the legitimate functions of government, if you actually bring it back to practical stuff, what must governments do? Most libertarians would concede national defence is a legitimate function of government, and most would also concede the criminal justice system and police system. Most libertarians would find it difficult to envisage privatising those functions as well. Beyond that, most libertarians would argue a free market would provide all the other services. You can argue about some of those things, standards, for example, biosecurity, for example. So there are some issues where you can have a good argument about it. But the point about bringing it back to tax, if the government does too much, you have to end up paying too much tax to pay for it. The legitimate role of government is, as I said, life, liberty and property. So if you shrink the government down to that level, it doesn't cost so much to supply, you don't need to tax as much, people have their own money and then they can spend it as they choose on the things that governments in the past might have provided. And if you go back far enough, governments didn't provide it. It's a relatively recent phenomenon for governments to try to do as many things as they currently do.
Andrew, George Christensen, your party colleague, last week tweeted, "Government is theft." Do you agree with George?
Look, I don't. I think there's been a very good intellectual explanation for having less tax. My view is that I would agree with that, but I want to defend a whole lot more social institutions than you two do. But last time I checked, we all paid our tax physically, therefore it simply can't be theft because they're not taking it. We're actually willingly giving it up. Okay.
Who here is willingly giving it up?
Can I change that adjective? You can be unwillingly,
Try not
but you are physically transferring that money yourself. They are not taking it.
Stop. Give me your wallet.
Andrew, the federal government will collect around $384–85 billion this financial year. That's a lot of money. These two would argue that's a lot of thievery. Why can't the government balance the budget?
Because about 90% of all of our welfare spending is locked into legislation. We can't simply stop programs that are extra legislative. So most of it's locked in and can't be changed. And people do expect that a lot of this stuff is a basic institution. The minute I come up with a hypothecated Treasury save dressed up as a social policy reform, people will just say, who's my grandfather or grandchild who's missing out on a payment? And we have World War III.
Yeah. So are you saying voters are to blame for this?
Absolutely. They are absolutely addicted to the supply of money and the redistribution of it.
Yeah. Malcolm, any comments?
I'm with David because what happens individually, humans are incredibly intelligent. As a mob, history has shown that we can be driven and coerced and we can be very, very destructive. And Parliament is a mob. There is a handful of people in charge of both main parties. And when they get control, we all know that happens. I've been told by very good sources, I've seen them, spoken to them, that the majority of Liberal National Coalition MPs in federal parliament are sceptics, and most of them are strong sceptics. Did we ever hear much about it? They were coerced by John Howard because he was scared by Kevin Rudd in 2007, so Johnny Howard had to follow suit. The first carbon dioxide emissions trading scheme was Liberal policy. The renewable energy target, which is destroying this country, was John Howard brought in. He stole farmers' property rights to comply with Kyoto, even though he said he never would. And 4 years after he got turfed out, he said, I'm agnostic on climate. The mob rules, and the mob is in Canberra, and we have got to speak up about that. I'm with David.
David, what would you do to balance the budget?
I have some sympathy for Andrew's argument. The mob is difficult. They vote themselves money, basically. They elect politicians who promise to give them money. And in order to stay elected, the politicians do what's expected of them. So it's difficult. What we have to do is win the argument that less spending is legitimate. I think we have to identify, and I have to say that in my discussions with Scott Morrison, the Treasurer, with Malcolm Turnbull, the Prime Minister, and various other ministers, by and large they get that pretty well. It's not a matter of not knowing what to do. The old joke about the EU ministers who met to discuss Greece, they emerged from the meeting and the Prime Minister of Luxembourg said, we all know what should be done, we just don't know how to do it and get elected. That is the issue we face. My view is the narrative can be changed and win the argument, and I've actually made this point to Scott Morrison recently. I think middle class welfare is a good place to start. There are a lot of people who are not poor who are receiving money from the government, and they think they're entitled to it because other people are getting it, but not because they're poor. They don't consider themselves poor. What we need is a narrative around illegitimate receipt of government money. Of, you know, if you're not poor, you shouldn't be receiving it, it doesn't really matter that your neighbour gets it as well. That's not legitimate. The other area that I think is an area where we can win the narrative is duplication between the states and the Commonwealth. We have thousands of people in the Federal Education Department, and yet they don't teach a single student. They don't run a single school. We have thousands of people in the Federal Health Department, and yet they don't treat a single patient or run a single hospital. We have Environment Department, Federal Environment Department that's employs thousands of public servants, and yet we have an environment department in every state government, of course, and often overlapping and competing with each other. Just getting rid of those sorts of things would be a good start. Now, they wouldn't go anywhere near enough from my point of view, but you've got to start somewhere. David,
while you're on that, you say we need to win the argument. Can you win the argument with the ABC? Is there a cultural bias there? And in an ideal world, what would you like to do with the ABC?
Well, Liberal Democrats' policy is to privatise it. The issue, of course, is that it's not a profit-making institution, so who would buy it is a legitimate question. Our policy is to give it away. So you corporatise it, issue, you know, how many, 24 million shares, and you give every Australian one share. So then Australians all own it, but they can dispose of their share if they like. And those who think it's a great investment can buy them from those who don't want to keep them, and then it's, you know, it raises its own funds and has a market value, would be listed on the ASX in due course, and you know, would carry on doing what it wants to do. And if we didn't want to pay for it anymore, we wouldn't have to, or we wouldn't be paying for it anymore. If we didn't want to have a stake in it, we would sell our shares, and if we didn't want to watch it, we wouldn't watch it, which of course a lot of people don't do already. Can it be fixed in terms of programming? Well, I made a small step in that direction this week. You've probably heard as a condition of my support for the ABCC bill, the government agreed to require the boards of SBS and ABC to have open forums in after at least half of their board meetings, and at least 2 of those each year have to be in the country. So the joke I made about it was the boards will have to go outside the goat cheese curtain and listen to people who are not, you know, the latte set, the Chardonnay socialists, whatever you want to call them, any label that you like. Now, I'm not under any illusions that that will suddenly transform the culture of the ABC so that it gives equal time to conservative or libertarian views as it does to left-wing views. That's a very big ask. But, you know, it might actually expose the board to the fact that they are representing a narrow range of views inside the goat cheese curtain, and that maybe that they could be a little more representative of their audience. But in the long run, I don't actually think it's fixable. Public radio and public television around the world tends to have what they call progressive views. It tends to be typically progressive views. So as long as it remains in public ownership, I think it will see itself as a progressive organisation. So get it out of public ownership, and I think that's the end solution.
Andrew, on the ABC, why does Malcolm Turnbull love the ABC so much?
Look, I think you'd be right to say we haven't made much progress in government, even under John Howard. I think what David's done is a pretty significant step, because at least you're ventilating the concerns directly to the board. I can think of some solutions that focus around increasing their listenership, readership, and if they're not doing that, they need to be penalised in some way. That could be a geographic, it could be a cultural, it could be an age-related analysis, but the main problem appears to be news and current affairs, let's be honest. A lot of the other programming isn't of concern. Perhaps they just need an arm of Fox News that's mandatory screen somewhere in the ABC programming.
That's a good idea. Malcolm, a couple of weeks ago you were seen celebrating with champagne corks and arm in arm with Pauline celebrating a Trump presidential victory. What is it about Trump that makes you so excited?
I don't know enough about Donald Trump to be excited about him as a person. What I'm very excited about is that the American people are at last waking up and realising they have a problem. This is the first time this election has been about anti-establishment. And the American people understand that both the Democrat establishment and the Republican establishment have been destroying their country. And so they see Donald Trump as an outsider. He's an anti-establishment party. Sound familiar? So what I like about this is that he represents the start of the overthrow of the establishment and getting government back to the people. That's what I like.
Okay. Andrew, we've seen the rise of Trump, the UK Brexit. In France, we've got Marine Le Pen surging in the polls. And dare I say it, you see quite clearly the re-emergence of One Nation. Are these things related or coincidental? And what's the Liberal Party going to do about this to stay, I guess, electorally relevant?
So without sounding complacent, we are, of those ones you listed, the only compulsory and preferential voting system. So it's going to absorb a lot of that swing to the right back into major parties. I'm just being completely frank there. And I've seen that happen before. There's been a little bit of impact in Queensland, but very temporarily. Look, I found myself privately going for Trump just because I've had a gut full of Clinton. And even the people were saying, I'm going to vote for Clinton. We know that 4 million of them actually didn't show up to vote, and that's what cost her the election. The Trump vote was exactly the same as the two previous Republican elections. So I just needed to see a new start. I appreciate that he is shaking the place up. I want to see what America does, invigorated in that respect. And lastly, I'm not pessimistic that he'll have big impacts that have been described from the campaign. I think you'll see a moderation and a US coming back to the table on trade, just on their own terms.
Okay. David, what do you see as the implication of the Trump victory?
Well, I was strongly advocating a vote for the Libertarian Party. But I had a Libertarian Party badge that I wore around Parliament House for a couple of weeks and made sure I wore it on every interview that I did during that period. But I have to say that if I was forced to choose between Trump and Clinton, and that would be an awful choice, I would have probably preferred Trump, just for similar reasons to Malcolm, that Clinton was just so awful, and she just represents a continuation of what's been awful for a long time now. I had a chat with James Paterson, Senator James Paterson, ex-IPA and also a Libertarian in the Liberal Party, after Trump had won. And we sort of batted it backwards and forwards, and we came to the conclusion we were pleased that Trump had won, but we're also very pleased that the Republicans had a majority in Congress, both houses of Congress, and that many of those Republicans had quite different views from Trump. Trump is a long way from being a libertarian, a long, long way from being a libertarian. And so therefore, what we hoped for was that Trump would be able to do the good things, the ones that, and we define good things as things we approve of, and Congress would stop him from doing the bad things. So we've got our fingers crossed on that. Let's see how it goes.
Andrew, let's move to Queensland. George Brandis was caught saying, I would say the state opposition is very, very mediocre, and the state government is very, very mediocre. And Campbell Newman endorsed that assessment. Being a Queenslander, what are your thoughts of the state LNP?
Well, Palaszczuk has distinguished herself by doing extremely little and surprisingly remaining moderately popular. And this is a lesson of do-nothing premiers usually get re-elected around the country. But, I'm surprised you're clapping, but I think the LNP have really lifted their game. So you've seen the rail dispute, you've seen Ros Bates coming out on child protection. I think the LNP are picking up their game. I don't agree with George, and I don't think he'd ever have said that publicly. But he obviously betrayed his feelings on the matter. I'm optimistic for the LNP, but they have to continue kicking these goals and be very wary that Labor is now, having done almost nothing, very cashed up for their election.
Malcolm, most political pundits are now saying that One Nation are going to hold the balance of power after the next Queensland election. What are the key reasons why Queenslanders will vote for the party next year?
Well, Pauline Hanson has said all along what she thinks, and that represents what people are thinking, because the number one thing about Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party is that we serve the interests of the people. That's fundamental. To do that, we have to listen. That's the second step. And then we have to speak out. And that's fundamental. People know that we will say the things that need to be said, and we are doing the things that need to be done. It's that simple.
Okay. David, you're from New South Wales. I've got a question for you. Who's more left-wing, Mike Baird or Anna Palaszczuk?
On economic things, Palaszczuk is substantially more left-wing. Mike Baird is actually relatively dry. He has been successful where previous premiers have failed in privatising the electricity infrastructure, for example. Raised a large amount of money, sold off also one of the ports, and is pouring that back into infrastructure. Infrastructure to sort of libertarian-ish type people is a forgivable government expense. I have my doubts about that, but still, I wouldn't die in the ditch fighting infrastructure expenditure as long as it's the right way, right expenditure. So I think what he's doing in economic terms is actually quite healthy for the state overall. But where he's failed a little bit is on social policy, and the big thing that brought him undone was greyhounds. He must have been talking to people inside the goat cheese curtain, as far as I can tell. It just was the dumbest thing, and it appears to have caught him by surprise that there were an awful lot of people outside the goat cheese curtain who thought greyhound racing was a legitimate activity. They weren't all beasts killing poor fluffy animals, and that there are also an awful lot of people who thought that they had, who weren't interested in greyhound racing but thought it was illegitimate to put them out of business. It was surprising how many, in fact, were of that view, and it generated a tremendous backlash. The National Party initially folded and then realised the mistake they'd made, but it was too late, and it gathered a massive amount of momentum. They lost the Orange by-election with a swing that was the highest ever in a by-election. They lost it to the Shooters Party, and I think Mike Baird probably won't be the Premier of New South Wales for more than another 6 months. That's my prediction. He is actually came out of the finance industry as a highly paid merchant banker. I have a feeling that he'll probably go back to being a highly paid merchant banker.
Andrew, what's the Canberra view of Mike Baird?
Look, I couldn't comment as a Queenslander. Maybe next question? Yeah.
Soft.
Yeah.
Soft. Malcolm, I have a question for you. There's something called the backpacker tax that went through Parliament. What the hell was that all about? There was negotiations left and right. This man, you're all involved. Can you explain it to the audience?
Less than 1 hour.
Yeah. Two words. Wayne Swan. Well, that's 2 words in itself. And the second one is horse trading. And the first one is that I honestly thought that the problem was Scott Morrison. When I went into Parliament, I realised that it was actually Wayne Swan. And I won't go into the details of that, but what we could see was the Labor Party painting everyone else as the problem when it was really them. So it's basically lies and deception. The second thing is horse trading. Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party believes in addressing each issue on its merits. And we believe that in the long term, that will help us get what we want for our constituents and for the people of Queensland and Australia, because the government will recognise when we raise a serious issue. That's fundamentally different from the way just about everyone else addresses these issues. And what caused the problem was Pauline Hanson and I and James Ashby listened to farmers who were very reliant on backpackers back in June. We listened to them. They were horrified with what was happening. And we heard them, and what stunned me, what delighted me, was that these farmers were saying, this is a serious problem, here's a solution, and they pointed to 15%. They'd done their maths. And when the logjam in Parliament needed to be broken, Pauline surfaced with the 15%. She got substantial agreement on that, only needed one more person. And the government, to its credit, and I mean to its credit, stood its ground at 15%. And that showed some people that they couldn't horse trade any further. But unfortunately, the Greens did something that was not recurrent, just a one-off payment, and that's what resolved that. But fundamentally, if people had voted on its merits, that would not have been a problem.
David, you're in the thick of that. Can you share?
I'll put it into a different context. There was a proposal from the government to essentially treat backpackers as non-residents for tax purposes, which would have meant they paid 32.5% tax on their earnings while they were in Australia. That generated a backlash from the farming groups and tourism industry and so forth, and also some backbenchers, some Liberal National Party backbenchers, and so that floated around for a while. It was raised before the election. I can't remember the exact timing, but eventually there was a compromise negotiated between the government, National Party, Liberal National Backbenchers, National Farmers Federation at 19%. It was always a tax increase. The government had budgeted for the $500 million odd tax that would be raised from these taxes. So the argument that 32.5% was the current situation and they were lowering the tax was always a bit difficult to accept if you are raising money. What they were relying on, though, was a tax ruling by the Australian Tax Office that hadn't been introduced, that would have classified all backpackers as non-residents for tax purposes. So it got a bit complicated. So anyway, there was still a backlash against the 19%. Labor Party said no, they wanted 10.5%. That came from their minister, Joel Fitzgibbon, who's the Shadow Minister for Agriculture, who is one of the most decent Labor Party guys you could find, very well plugged into agriculture. He said 10.5% because that's what New Zealand charges, and if we charge more tax than New Zealand, backpackers will go to New Zealand and not come to Australia. He was right, except that they get paid more in Australia, so the attraction is still there. And in any case, most backpackers come to Australia for the drinking and the sex, not for the money. So that not necessarily a strictly incentive-based issue was at stake. Anyway, it became totemic. Labor decided they were able to wedge the Liberal and National Party by sticking to 10.5. Scott Morrison argued that he needed the revenue that would be raised by a higher tax. He said if that revenue wasn't raised in that way, it would have to be raised in another way, and he had a point. It was also going to leave a level of uncertainty about whether the tax office would get away with its ruling that they were non-residents for tax purposes. I originally voted with Labor on 10.5 because I'll always vote for low taxes if I have a choice. But it became obvious that it was going to be a legal picnic. It was going to be very uncertain, and so I negotiated with the Treasurer to get a couple of concessions which would help to protect the privacy of farmers, so their details wouldn't be on this register for the unions to go and target them. So it was, but it became a totemic issue between Labor Party on the one side and the government on the other side, and seeing who was going to blink first.
In a sense, the statement summarised it elegantly. I feel utterly like you, utterly unclean whenever I vote with the Greens, or they vote with us. But in reality, it shows me one thing, and I feel clean again. It shows how much they hate Labor. They detest Labor, and that's precisely why they did the deal. Yeah.
I'd like to make a comment on something that David said. I'm not fully informed on this at the moment, but I've come to understand recently, by talking with people in the Australian Taxation Office, that a lot of tax law is not made in Parliament. It's made by the ATO.
Regulations.
Rulings. They're made through rulings, and they're arbitrary, determinations. And I've got personal experience with that, and I know other people who've got that, and that is destroying our tax system as well.
I can see with the explanations of Malcolm and David, it's cleared everyone's minds up about the backpacker tax. We might just change tact here. We're just going to play a little game here. I'm going to say a name to you, and you're going to respond with the first couple of words that come off the top of your head. Andrew, Clive Palmer.
Sigmund Freud.
Malcolm, David Leyonhjelm.
Helpful. I tell the truth. He's helpful. He's been very helpful to us in
David, Glenn Lazarus.
Waste of space.
Andrew, Tony Abbott.
Superman.
Malcolm, Rob Cullerton.
Emotional.
Fair enough.
Oh God, who am I up to? David, Malcolm Roberts.
Short?
Yeah, well, yeah. Passionate about climate change, not one word. I don't know a word for that. Yeah.
I thought I was going to get you to a room, but anyway. Andrew, Pauline Hanson.
The Ranger with Purpose.
The Ranger with Purpose.
The Ranger redhead with purpose.
Nothing wrong with a Ranger, mate. Malcolm, Hillary Clinton.
Liar.
David, Malcolm Turnbull.
Decent.
David, on Malcolm Turnbull, you've dealt with 2 Prime Ministers now. Can you just share with us the differences that you see between, say, the Abbott administration, or Abbott himself, and Malcolm Turnbull, and Malcolm, the difference between the two?
Yeah. I'm still sort of trying to understand it fully myself, but Tony Abbott didn't engage very much with the crossbench at all. When he did, it was a bit awkward and stiff. He watched every single word he said. Malcolm is warm and engaging, talks too much probably, rather than not enough. I must admit the chemistry works much better. As far as the government is concerned, the election from 2013, when there were 8 crossbenchers elected, was the first time the government had to deal with a crossbench of that size. Prior to that, it had just been John Madigan and Nick, and then going back, it was Steve Fielding and Nick, and Brian Harradine going back. So they hadn't been in a situation where they'd had to deal with such a big crossbench. They needed to get 6 out of 8 of the crossbench. They were not very good at it. They didn't know how to do it. They used to communicate with us via the media sometimes. Sometimes they would come and see us and tell us, and then if we didn't get it, they'd tell us again. If we didn't get it, we'd tell us again. There was often no negotiation. Sometimes there was negotiation, and wonder of wonders, it helped. The government struggled a bit to deal with the Clive Palmer group, because the only thing that they had in common was Clive's money. And so there are no values, no shared objectives. So, we had Jackie Lambie, Glenn Lazarus, Dio Wang. They didn't agree on anything much. So the group fell apart. It was an evolving situation, and the government also, the Liberal Party is much less accustomed to negotiation than the Labor Party is. So they would just felt uncomfortable. The Labor Party, on the other hand, they negotiate with each other all the time. They do deals with each other all the time within their factions and so on. They were much more comfortable with the idea of dealing with the crossbench. Now, so that meant the government wasn't very good at dealing with the crossbench, and also the dynamics of the crossbench changed over time. This Parliament, when Malcolm became the Prime Minister, he reached out to us a bit more, but by then a lot of the damage was done. And he started off well, but then he also disappeared for a while. We didn't hear from him for a good long period, so there wasn't a follow-up. Since the election, Malcolm has been more engaged. The ministers are working harder to win over the crossbench. Their task is, in numerical terms, more difficult. They have to get 9 out of 11 rather than 6 out of 8. But there are bigger groupings now. There was 4 One Nation. 3 is Nick Xenophon, and and some of the ministers are performing better. I must say though that they still keep repeating the same mistakes. You'll get one minister who will put in a lot of time and effort working on the crossbench, understand what motivates us, what we're looking for, what kind of trade-offs we'll be looking for, do a deal, and then the deal is done, go away and we'll vote according to the deal. And then another minister will come along with a different bill and we'll start from a blank sheet of paper. They won't have found out what motivates us, what worked last time, how to approach us that's successful. I've seen it over and over and over again, and it's bizarre that they don't. I mean, if it was a business, you would never go, if you're negotiating for an acquisition or a merger or something like that, you would have a war room where you would write up the details of what you know from your previous meetings, and the next time you would go in, if you had new personnel, they would go in there and learn what had been discovered the previous meetings, and you just would not start from a blank sheet of paper each time. But that happens over and over.
Andrew, you've dealt with 3 Prime Ministers from the inside. Can you just, we're running out a little bit of time, but could you just share your insights and maybe the difference between the 3? That's Howard, Abbott and Turnbull.
Well, obviously Howard was the most consummate and complete of the 3. People ask 2 simple questions of politicians. Do I like them? And are they like me? You are looking at the difference between an idealist in Abbott and a pragmatist in Turnbull. We saw in Abbott the first Prime Minister we ever saw in swimmers since Holt. And there he was everywhere. He was just like us, but he had, with respect, a likeability problem. And you've got exactly the opposite in Malcolm. A guy whose life is so surreal you'll never understand his background. And yet, I know some of you will disagree, he is an innately likeable person. And that will surprise many of you, but he is a likeable person. And that makes my life incredibly easy, not engaging ideological battles at every turn. That's the difference.
Malcolm, I'm going to move on. I'd like to talk about the issue of free speech. And in particular, there's been a case up here that I'm sure most people are aware of where 3 or some QUT students have been caught in a Human Rights Commission trap, if you like, where Section 18C has been used against them. I'd like to ask a question of you, but there's someone in the room that knows a little bit more about this than I do. Callum Thwaites is one of those students. Callum, would you like to come forward and ask a question?
My question, specifically the timing of this with David, your complaint, the handling of the Human Rights Commission. How do all of you feel about the way the Human Rights Commission's handled your complaint, the Paul Zanetti complaint recently, compared to how they handled the complaint against myself and the other students and Bill Leaf as well? Do we feel that there is any groupthink or preferred client base? And what do each of you think we should do to fix the Human Rights Commission?
There are 2 aspects to it, to your question. One is the process of dealing with complaints under the Racial Discrimination Act, particularly 18C, and the other one is the law itself. So if I was dictator for a day or whatever, I would repeal 18C entirely and abolish the Human Rights Commission. That would be how I would do it. To answer your questions in a little more detail, yes, the Human Rights Commission is to a significant extent, I'm not suggesting entirely, but to a significant extent, captured by progressives. Progressives who don't really believe in free speech unless they happen to agree with it. They give lip service to the idea of free speech. They're attempting to administer a law which they really in their heart don't believe in. They are also very much have signed up to the identity politics. In my case, for example, how could I possibly be complaining about something on the basis of race when I'm white. Obviously, you can't be a victim of racism if you're white. Not that I'm claiming to be a victim of racism. What I'm arguing is that what was written about me was unlawful under Section 18C. They're struggling a great deal to get their heads around that idea that something can be unlawful, and I'm white and I'm not even offended by it. So. I don't know whether there's a solution in the short term. My objective is to expose the absolute ridiculous nature of 18C if I can use it against a progressive journalist, and in the process show to these progressives this law is not what you think it is. It can be turned against you. Then I might make some progress. On the other hand, I might not. I might have to find another way to blow the thing up.
Callum, firstly, I want to acknowledge what you've been through and what you've done. Thank you very much. I'm not at all surprised. I'm not at all surprised that a government body can do what the HRC does. What really makes me wonder what's happening in our country is when I read press reports, so I don't know if they're accurate, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that the Vice-Chancellor of the QUT knew about this some time ago and kept it to himself. They have got senior executives, people in senior positions, scared. And we see in the coal industry, with the exception of a handful of senior leaders, most leaders afraid to call out the climate change scam for what it is, a scam. And we have got weakness at corporate level, largely because they've painted things as an environmental issue, and then if you stand against it, you're anti-environment. That's rubbish. We need to come back to realise that the myth that the Greens have put before us and that the Liberals and Labor Party have, by their silence, shown complicity, is that we have on the one hand the environment or civilisation. That is complete rubbish. The environment is protected when we have a healthy civilisation. A healthy environment enables the future of our civilisation. Both are mutually dependent. Now, that's just one example of what the suppression of free speech has done in this country. We can't speak about the environment. But we really can, because the environment is a wonderful tool for us to use. Because to protect the environment, we need freedom. Now, it comes back to freedom of speech. Stalin had freedom of speech, so long as you were totally free to speak in favour of the government. Totally free. And what we have to realise here is that we don't have the rifle boot and the jackboot and the rifle butt over our heads. We have the smearing of people. And I come back to David's point. He summarised it better than anyone else I've said. Offence can be taken but never given. We need to scrap 18C, totally get rid of it, and we need to gut the HRC, get rid of it as well. We need... I went to the University of Chicago, and this year in June, July, the head of the, I can't remember what he's called, the dean, I think, of the University of Chicago, wrote a letter to all of the incoming students and said, there is no free space, safe space, free space, I think he said, within the University of Chicago. Suck it up and get used to it.
Yes, that's right.
Do I have to give a trigger warning before my answer? Look, my worry is that until you out there can convince more of the community that this is a mainstream issue, we will bleed if we try and solve the problem. But my personal view is that insult and offend has to be struck out of this Act. There is still a role for racial discriminators out there. I think the Commission is overfunded, and I think it has way too low a threshold for initiating cases like this. I'd like to move it right up to the egregious and obvious cases. I'd probably support that they still exist. And well done, Callum.
Ladies and gentlemen, Callum is still involved in ongoing proceedings and won't be taking any questions, but I'm sure you'll join with me in wishing him all the best. And Callum, I hope you realise you have a lot of friends out there for you. That brings the close of this part of proceedings, and I'm sorry we've gone over a little bit there in time. Let's take some questions from the floor. Just the best is just to shout them out, I think, rather than wait for the microphone. Yes, thank you.
Dr. Lamech, KPNC, is there any reason other than the Muslim vote in Western Sydney that the Liberal Party won't grapple with this issue?
So I'm not an expert in this area of policy, but I understand that that my